Thanks much. I'm really grateful to be here. I'm just learning so much. Thanks to Eileen, to all the organizing members for all of your work. Uh, Here's my proposal. Aristotle might be able to teach us a few things about observing swans and living with them. Now you're probably asking, what is this guy doing here? I'm a philosopher. I work in moral philosophy and the history of philosophy. I've written a lot of books, nothing on swans. Okay. A year ago, I was teaching a doctoral level seminar in Aristotle's Ethics. I knew I had a research leave coming up this semester. I'm on sabbatical now. And I thought, here's what I'm going to do for my research leave, what Carl just said. Okay, so I've spent a lot of time over the last year following this swan, 5P. So I want to tell you that story. We'll talk a little bit about Aristotle and about the time I've spent watching 5P. St. Louis is right in the middle of the country. There we are. Those of you that went to the last Trumpeter Swan meeting, it was right there where I live in Alton. In fact, I'll be talking about that. And then some of the story that I'm going to tell is up here, about 600 miles north of St. Louis. That's where 5P travels. So let me talk to you about following 5P with Aristotelian eyes. I'm going to ask these three questions. What might be learned by observing swans through Aristotelian eyes? What does it mean for 5P to live well? And what does it mean for us to live well as observers of swans? In the recent Cambridge Companion to Aristotle's Biology, which just came out last year, Cynthia Freeland makes the following observation. After Darwin, we typically account for the perceptions and behaviors of animals by appealing to evolutionary advantage. In contrast, Aristotle, in his biological writings, framed issues in a quite different manner by focusing on capacities that, quote, equip animals to fulfill their natural ends in order to understand what it means for animals to live and to live well. So Aristotle's goals were quite different from those of contemporary evolutionary biologists. Rather than focusing on populations, his goal was to understand this animal, right? In these terms, in terms of this animal's life, practices, traits, and parts. So I really work in neo-Aristotelian virtue ethics. So I want to draw this distinction between Aristotle and the neo-Aristotelians, and just maybe mention a few of them. This is a groundbreaking work in 1981, Alistair McIntyre's book, After Virtue. But then there's been this whole, if you look at the neo-Aristotelian resurgence, Aristotle's revenge. The women are up to something because a lot of the scholars working in this space are women. Elizabeth Anscombe, Philippa Foot, Rosalind Hirschhaus, Iris Murdoch, and then McIntyre's 1990 book, Dependent Rational Animals. Now in his 1981 book, After Virtue, he said he could give an account of the virtues without relying on Aristotle's metaphysical biology. Right? So he gives this account of the virtues in terms of social practices, where a virtue is a trait, the exercise of which allows one to pursue excellence in a social practice. But in 1999, he backs off and says, okay, my critics, there's a lot of critics of his. This was a groundbreaking work, but a lot of people say no. Aristotle's account of biology is integral to his whole account of the virtues, and the title shows you that he ends up agreeing with that. Dependent rational animals, that human beings are animals, but here he focuses on dependence, right? So it's just very briefly, I want to point to some of this book. Chapter 1, I don't know if you can see it, is on vulnerability, dependence, that we're animals, the swans are vulnerable, we are vulnerable, right? And chapter 2, he tries to puzzle through what is it for us to be animals? How are we like the other animals? How are we different from the other animals? And chapter 3 is on the intelligence of dolphins. In that chapter, he refers to an article that appeared in Scientific American called "The Ring Bubbles of Dolphins." The article uses the language of practices, social practices. As you might know, dolphins, of course, they breathe through their blowhole when they get excited. They can shoot a lot of air out. And it turns out they can learn how to blow bubbles like people blow smoke rings, right? Dolphins do this too. In fact, they'll spend months and months learning how to get really good at it. Mothers teach this to their young. They can blow them in different shapes. Instead of the bubbles just going up, they can make them go sideways or even down. They can swim through them. They'll spend like months and months and months getting really good at this practice. Right. So right in this chapter, McIntyre references all these dolphin activities: breathing, perceiving, communicating, cooperating, swimming, scouting, hunting, herding, eating, reproducing, raising their young, and playing the ring bubble game, right? And so through pursuing excellence in these practices, they develop a set of dolphin traits that allow them to flourish as dolphins, right? So McIntyre here is drawing on this Aristotelian framework. In Aristotle, this central concept of a practice, in Greek praxis, right? And so in McIntyre's account, of practice is a complex, coherent, social, cooperative, autotelic activity. Autotelic means that the goal that you're pursuing is in the activity. Those of you that are familiar with the flow experience, this idea that, right, in Greek, autotelic, that the goal, telos, is in the activity. When you're in this flow experience, that you just feel like, right, things are flowing freely. The goal that you're pursuing is in the activity, doing the activity well. Right? Just want to mention this. If you want a quick 1-hour documentary view of Aristotle's biology, I really recommend this BBC documentary, Aristotle's Lagoon. It's easy to find online. You can watch it online, based on this book by the biologist Armand Leroy. There's parts of it. Here's what I sort of don't agree with in this. He just reads Aristotle as someone who's preparing us to become scientists. Part of that's right, but Aristotle's also doing something really different, asking philosophical questions. So after, here I am, I've gone over this section on dolphins with my students countless times, and I decided I'm going to go back and reread Aristotle's History of Animals, which I had not read since graduate school. So I don't recommend this. It's really hard. Right? It's a tough book. It's tough sledding. Right? It's pretty interesting. I mean, there's a lot on the octopus and cuttlefish and dolphins and all kinds of things. Right? But compared to some of Aristotle's other books, he doesn't really tell you what he's up to until pretty deep into it. And then he finally says, right, that he's going to focus on these 4 things: the bios, the life of the animals, the praxis, their activities or practices, their ethi, their dispositions or traits, and their parts. So that's really the key to the book. This is an Aristotelian approach to focus on animal lives, practices, traits, and parts. When I read it, I was really struck, though, by what Aristotle says about swans and cranes. What he says about dolphins is interesting, don't get me wrong, but I was just taken with what he says about swans and cranes, right? Let me go through some of what he says here. He draws a distinction between animals that are solitary and animals that are social. Among birds that are solitary, points out that birds that have talons tend to be solitary, right? But among social birds, he draws a further distinction. He says some social animals live in mass groups, while others, he says, are political. This was surprising to me. I had always thought Aristotle thinks humans are the political animal, but that's not quite right. He thinks humans are a political animal, and that there are other political animals too. Those that live in mass groups, right, are herding animals. Those that are political, he says, are some of the animals that live in flocks, or some of the fish that live in schools. Now, the groups that live in herds, each one, he says, lives for its own sake. It just happens to be more efficient for that animal to pursue its own life in a group with others, where the political animals, he says, act together in pursuit of a common good. And here he specifically mentions swans, cranes, and several species of migrating fish. And he makes a further distinction among those that pursue a common good. He says some animals that live together and pursue a common good, each one is its own master. He mentions ants as an example, but there are others where each individual is capable of subjecting one's life to a ruler who exercises practical wisdom to pursue the common good. He mentions here the crane and several sorts of beasts. So I find myself with these questions. First, what are you talking about, Aristotle? Right? Do you mean to be saying that swans and cranes are intelligent, that they live in political communities, that they exercise practical wisdom in submitting themselves to a leader that they judge will guide the group toward the shared good that they seek in common? What observations could support these claims and distinctions? He doesn't give us a lot there. He just sort of says these things and doesn't tell what he's basing this on. And I've got some more questions, right? How might we gather evidence to tell whether any of this is true? What would it take for us to look at and behold animals the way Aristotle does? What can we do to learn to discern whether particular practices have autotelic good? So look, I'm doing some pretty strange research here. I've learned a lot from you guys, and I had read a lot of your work over the last year, and even here in the last 2 days, looking at population trends, block movements, threats to survival, habitat issues, but that's not really Aristotle's focus. The thing is, when you read the contemporary Aristotelians, most of them don't know the first thing about animals, right? Probably a lot of them know nothing more than a third grader about swans, right? They focus, but they're really smart people. They know a lot about texts, about translation, about interpretation. So I found myself doing research that's somewhere in between these two. So for the last year, starting last winter in November, about a year ago, and all through the winter, I found myself following a particular swan, right? And then even into the summer. So let me tell you that story a little bit. This is a map of St. Louis right there. That's the university. We're almost near downtown. Up here at the top, this is the Audubon Center at Riverland. Some of you were here a few years ago. And I've definitely over the years seen trumpeter swans there many times. We first got them beginning in the early 90s. I also learned about this area. I'd passed it over the years, and this figures into the story that I'm going to tell. This is right near the confluence of the Mississippi and Missouri rivers, where Lewis and Clark started their expedition. In one of their first diary entries, they say they saw swans in great number at that site. And then right across the river, site number 3, this is the Columbia Bottoms Conservation Area. It's a managed wetland, and that figures into the story that I'm going to tell. So on December 1st, I was at this site number 2 on the map that I just showed you. And you can see there are a lot of birds there. Some of them are pelicans, some of them are gulls. I counted 117 trumpeter swans, and I was drawn to this particular group, this family right here, which I would later come to learn is 5P. 5P was collared. At that time, I didn't know the first thing about GPS collars. I didn't know any of that business. Here's what I'm doing. I don't know if you know Holly, the swan whisperer, but I'm doing what she did. I'm just sitting there on this stump watching this swan for hours on end to try to figure out what is Aristotle talking about here, right? So I'm looking at this group. Here's 5P and her mate and her 8 little ones, right? And after a little while, they came over and looked at me and got pretty close, right? And group after group would take off, right? So elegant, so beautiful, so graceful, right? And day after day, I'm going out there and watching them. One group would take off, and the next group, and the groups would form larger groups together. But it's a 1.5 mile walk to get back there to where I am. And when they take off, I don't know where they're going. December 10th, we had a tornado that came through. The site where I'm going is right basically where the old Route 66 crosses the Mississippi River. There's old industry there. There's steel mills nearby, but now you got this post-industrial economy, Amazon plants. In fact, one of the tornadoes took out an Amazon warehouse. 6 people were killed there. It's very close. I don't know if you can see number two is where the site was, that's the line of where the tornado was. So I'm worried, holy cow, did these tornadoes, did it wipe out? But I went back. They weren't going to that site as much. Now I'm across the river. This is my grandson. He helps me in the observations sometimes. But they're out in this field far away. We can't see them nearly as close as I could before. Now what happens, of course, everyone in St. Louis gets the Omicron virus, including me, right? And so my wife divides up the house. She's like, you get this room, blah, 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 right? And so I'm stuck in there. And that's when I find out about this program here that David is in charge of. And I learned about 5P, right? And so now I start, oh, I can figure out where I'm going. So I end up going up here. This is a little town called Dorsey. It turns out in the winter, there are more swans in the town than there are people, and then up to Bunker Hill. So here's Dorsey, Illinois. I observed 156 swans, and then right, Bunker Hill, right, 500 swans, right, 1,000 by the end of the month. I'm running out of time. Here we are. It's we got warm weather. They're all gone, right? What did I learn from this? Right? To think about swan behavior, focusing on, right, its context-dependent stimulus response, quantifiable, measurable. A swan practice, right, is, as I've said before, right, boom, they go up north. In the summer, I had the opportunity to get up there and talk with Jenna, right? I don't know if Taylor is here, and Taylor might be in this picture. I haven't met Taylor. Maybe Taylor's the one that Jenna told me about their activities, their collaring. So I travel up there. This is when the day they collared. I go up there a year later. I saw the nest. I see 5P. I was able to see the same and aging in this porch. So I said my proposal was that Aristotle might be able to teach us a few things. One, attentiveness to particular animals, a vocabulary for living well, and maybe an additional method. Right? So it's focusing not just on populations, but on this animal, focusing on activities, there's practices, both swan practices and human practices. I propose provides a grammar for extending shared inquiry about what it is for swans and humans to live and to live well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, we're running a little late, so we're going to skip question.